Hello guys, welcome back to the second video. First video we were white and we were learning how to play the Scholar's Mate, and on the second video we are now going to be black and we're going to learn the proper way of blocking the Scholar's Mate. Now, over my, I want to say 10 years of coaching, I've encountered two of the most famous way that kids like to continue the Scholar's Mate. Now, I'm also going to include the video on what to play if your opponent does block the Scholar's Mate. So let's go ahead and start off on how to block it first, and how to continue if they try to play those two lines. So my opponent played e4, e5. If your opponent does end up playing queen to h5, do not get scared, guys. Remember, this pawn's already defended. This pawn is defended. The only pawn you need to defend right now is your e5 pawn. So knight c6 is the correct move because it does defend the e5 pawn. If your opponent plays bishop to c4, notice that they're focusing their attack on f7. Now we know we have to either support or block in order to avoid getting checkmated. So I really don't recommend knight to h6 because then bishop can easily come and capture your knight. What I do recommend is g6. Now, if your opponent answers back with queen f3, notice they're still attacking f7. The move here, guys, if you remember, it's knight to f6. Why knight f6? Because the queen no longer attacks f7. Now the queen attacks f6. So if the queen tries to capture the knight, your queen can capture his queen. So these are two famous lines. The first one is when they play g4, and the idea is that they want to play pawn to g5, so when your knight moves, then they can play queen captures f7. The other line is when they bring queen to b3, and what they do is they create a battery with the bishop, and they're both attacking f7. So if bishop was to capture, the king would have to move. It can't capture because the queen would be protecting the bishop. So let's go ahead and look at queen to b3. Now, notice that they are attacking f7, but this is a little trick, guys, that I like to teach, and it's bringing your knight to d4. That's the key square for your knight, because not only do you attack the queen, you're also threatening a fort on c2 by attacking the king and the rook. So knight here. This is a bait pawn. We want them to capture. So if they do capture on f7, we just push up the king to e7. Now notice that his queen is still under attack. So that means that the queen has to move. Now if the queen tries to check you, it leaves this piece unprotected and the king can easily capture the bishop. Now, queen cannot move to e6 because of the pawn and the knight, and it cannot move to d5 because this knight can easily capture on d5. So the only square that the queen can go to is c4. Now, here there's a move that we can force the queen out of the G8 A2 diagonal. I'm going to give you guys some time to look for the move. And if you were thinking B5, you are correct. Because now the queen has to move again because it's under attack. And let's say the queen goes to C3. Now we can easily just capture on F7. So we just capture on F7 and we'll be perfectly fine. Now, the reason that you don't play, because D5 is another possibility to attack the queen, but if D5 is played, the bishop can go back and capture. So that's why with B5, queen has to move because it's under attack. And if the queen decides to capture the pawn, the knight on D4 is protecting the B5 pawn. Alright, so that is one way of blocking that trick. Now, the next one is when they play G4. So let's go back. E4, E5, queen to H5, knight to C6, bishop to C4, G6, queen F3, knight F6. Now we're going to look at when they push up G4. Now notice that here we cannot play knight captures G4 because the queen is protecting. Remember, before you capture any piece, you want to verify if it is protected. Now, just like when queen played B3, you're going to play the same thing as they played queen B3 here. So, what did we play when they played queen B3? Knight to D4. So here it's the same thing. We're going to play knight to D4. Now the reason for knight D4 is we attack the queen and we're threatening on C2 to create a fork on both the king and the rook. So it kind of forces the queen to go back to D1. Now after the queen plays to D1, now you can see that there's no threat on them attacking F7 and creating the scholar's mate. So the way that you would continue here is by pushing this pawn to D5, going towards the center. Also, your bishop is developing. This pawn was free, guys, but I really don't like that move. They can easily just, and it's not that it's a bad move. It is a good move, but I think D5 is probably a bit stronger. So here they have two choices to capture. The one that I see the most is when the pawn captures on D5, and if they do capture on D5, then you can easily just play knight captures on G4, and now you are being the aggressor. You're the one being aggressive. You have moves like bringing your queen to H4, F6, and you can create a lot of pressure. Let's say the bishop captures after you play pawn to D5, then here you can easily just play bishop captures G4. And now you're putting pressure on their queen, as you can tell. Now here F3 is probably a very popular move, and then after f3 you can easily just play knight captures d5, and depending on what they capture will be what you play. So let's say the pawn on e4 captures on d5, then you can play queen to h4. Or regardless, if the pawn captures here, you can also just play queen to h4. And black is way better in this position. You're more developed. Your king is a lot safer than his king, because notice that all his kingside pawns have moved. So now he's not going to be able to castle kingside. You can still play bishop to g7 and castle. So that is how you block the scholar's mate. Now we're gonna go back to white, and what we're gonna do here is, what do we play if my opponent blocks the scholar's mate? So let's say I play e4, they play e5, I play queen to h5, knight c6, bishop to c4, g6, queen f3, and they play knight f6. Well, we know what we would do if we played queen b3 and pawn to g4. So we have to figure out, how do we stop d4? Now there is two ways. I'm gonna give you guys some time to pause the video so you guys can look for the two different ways to stop the knight from going to d4. Okay, if you said c3, you are correct. The other move is knight to e2. Now the move that I highly recommend is knight to e2, because right away we can get ready to castle, and we can also, in case we have to protect this e4 pawn, we can also just bring it to g3. But I think knight e2 is the best move in this order. Alright guys, so this is the way you continue. Now it's just about making sure you follow the 3 rules. Remember, rule number 1 is to control the center, which consists from c6 to c3, from c3 to f3, from f3 to f6, and from f6 to c6. This is the center, guys, of the chessboard. That's what I mean by controlling the centers, and you control the center with your pawns. Now, rule number 2 is to develop towards the center, because if you notice, if the knights go to the corner, the knight would only have 3 available options. As if you were to bring it to the center, let's say we were to go to f3, we would have more choices of our knight. So the knight is stronger in the center. Sometimes you do have to develop towards the outside, but not all the time. You'll learn that eventually. Let's see here. So guys, if you guys have any questions, guys, remember, we can always chat on chesskid.com, and feel free to ask us any question, challenge us, guys. We check our Chess Kid accounts every day for any challenges, and we do enjoy accepting playing against y'all. Alright guys, y'all have a good one, guys. Take care. Peace.